Debate, the honourable member for Lethbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Imagine for just a moment going into a bookstore, and as soon as you walk into the bookstore, there's a guide, and you are allowed to go through this bookstore only with his or her help. Now, in this bookstore, there are yellow books, and there are purple books, and blue books, and green books, red books. Oh, there are red books. In fact, the red books are the only ones that the guide will take you to. The yellow books, the green books, the blue books, the purple books, the pink books, well, they're all there, seemingly available to you as a consumer. But the guide is actually not permitted to take you to look at those books. The guide is only permitted to take the consumer to the red books. So of course, yes, in theory, you have this entire store with all of these lovely books. But at the end of the day, the guide will only take you to the red books. Now you might ask, well, I'd like to go through the bookstore on my own without the assistance of this guide. He seems rather ridiculous. But no, that is not an option. You must go through the store with this guide, because that is the rule of the store. This is the internet under the Liberal Government of Canada, if Bill C-11 passes. The internet will be guided through a Liberal government's lens. They will determine what content Canadians can and cannot see. Now, in theory, there's this big, wide-open internet with all of this content. But of course, the vast majority of that content will be bumped down in priority, in other words, made undiscoverable. But the red content will be made top priority, moved toward page 1. This is where Canadians will be pointed to. So when they go on YouTube and want to find information that they care about, or watch videos that they're passionate about, or explore topics that they want to learn more about, instead, the government will make sure that they are pointed toward videos that the government has curated for them to watch. That is what C-11 is all about. Now, an individual might say, well, I will use my search bar to look for the things that I wish to watch. No, you won't, because the government will take control of one's search bar and actually direct them toward the things the government wants them to watch. That is how the internet will be curated. That is how it will work. Legal experts came to our committee at the House of Commons and also appeared in Senate. Within the House of Commons, we heard from several who actually likened this bill.
Order from the honourable member for l'honorable député de Berthier-Masquet.
Honourable member for Berthier-Masquet. Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Speaker. The interpreter has said that there's an earpiece situated too close to the microphone, and that's creating some feedback, so the earpiece might need to be moved.
That may be too close to the microphone there. Is there a headset anywhere near, or things turned up that shouldn't be? So we'll just make sure everything is clear. That's probably that one. There you go. Perfect. All right, so let's hope everything's going to be fine. Merci beaucoup pour l'interprétation.
Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Lethbridge, and apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, with Bill C-11, those who enjoy online streaming platforms such as Netflix or Disney+, or who enjoy watching videos on platforms such as YouTube, or maybe even just scrolling through Facebook and looking at people's pages, these individuals will be impacted in terms of the type of content that they can access, in terms of what they can watch, because Bill C-11 will determine the type of information that is put in front of them. Bill C-11 will determine the content that is put in front of our eyeballs. It will control, and by saying Bill C-11, what I mean is, according to Clause 7 of the bill, actually it will be Cabinet that can determine through the CRTC what Canadians can see, post, or hear online. Again, it's Cabinet, based on Clause 7, that will be given that authority. Now that's scary. That's scary for any government that is in power, because that means that Cabinet, which is partisan, will be directing what we can see, say, or post online. Now, instead of giving a viewer more of what they want, YouTube will be instructed to give more of what the government wants. Again, this is very scary for most Canadians. Now, the government will claim, as the honourable member just before me did, that this bill is about, quote, supporting Canadian culture or levelling the playing field. But in fact, that's actually not true. Bill C-11 amends the Broadcasting Act by bringing the internet under its provisions. Now, in order to understand the effect of this, we have to understand why the Broadcasting Act was put in place in the first place. In the early 20th century, the Broadcasting Act was put in place to regulate TV and radio because there's a finite commodity. There's only a certain number of radio stations or a certain number of TV stations. And so in order to make sure that both official languages were represented within these platforms, the government determined that they should be regulated. So that French language and culture, namely, would be protected, that it would be given space within these spheres. Further to that, there was a definition given to Canadian content. We call it CanCon. And so there was this determination that a certain percentage of the content would be Canadian, CanCon. And the goal there was to protect our culture, to make sure that it wasn't just American content that was making its way up to Canada, but rather that Canadian content, things produced here, and a whole host of other criteria that are used, would be given space. Now, that's within the realm of TV and radio, which is limited. But now we're dealing with a space that is infinite. It's unlimited, the internet. Anybody who wants a website can have a website, no matter their language of choice. Anybody who wants to have a YouTube channel can have a YouTube channel. Anybody who wants to have a space within TikTok or Instagram, etc., can have a space. We are no longer dealing with a finite resource. The government doesn't need to regulate which content then should be prioritized and which content shouldn't be, because we're no longer dealing with limitations. There's space for everyone. And I would plead with the government to perhaps look back on the record of what the former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien had to say with regard to this. In 1999, he faced a similar question around the internet and whether or not it should be regulated. And after undergoing thorough investigation and a public inquiry, the determination was made that it should not be. He determined that the internet was so different than TV and radio that to treat it the same would actually be to stifle progress. And so after numerous public consultations, because there have been many done since Chrétien, here we are, willing to function in a regressive way rather than maintaining the progressive stance that was taken by the former Jean Chrétien. Now, at that time, I'll read what the directive stated in 1999. It said this: the Commission, the CRTC, expects that the exemption of these services, internet, will enable continued growth and development of the new media industries in Canada, thereby contributing to the achievement of the broadcasting policy objectives, including access to these services by Canadians. In other words, the determination was made that the internet would not be scoped into the Broadcasting Act, that it would not be regulated. And the reason for that was because there was this belief that innovation would take place if it was left alone, that advancement would take place if it was left alone, that growth would take place if it was left alone, that opportunity would be seized by all sorts of people from all sorts of regions with all sorts of backgrounds and from all different linguistic ways. I would invite this government to consider its regressive stance and to pull this legislation. On the internet, everyone has a spot to showcase their talent. On the internet, every single individual in this country has an opportunity to thrive should they wish to. Most people in this country have a smart device. You need nothing more than to showcase talent and make a name for yourself. The gatekeepers have been removed. In fact, it's never been easier for Canadians to succeed. It's never been easier for creators from a variety of linguistic and cultural backgrounds to reach not just a Canadian audience, but a global audience. So for this legislation to build walls around these individuals and keep them hemmed in within Canada is so egregious that it's hard for one to even fathom the reason for such legislation. Why would we punish our young creators? Why would we punish the next media content creators? Why would we insist that a regressive form must be kept, that progress shouldn't be celebrated? It baffles me, but I'm not the only one. It baffles Canadians from coast to coast, whether it's legal experts speaking out on this topic, or digital-first creators speaking out, or just Canadian consumers who simply just want choice. The fact is the gatekeepers have been removed. Where a creator used to have to put together a pitch or a package and bring it to the gatekeeper, such as CBC or Chorus Entertainment or Bell Media or Rogers, and they would have to plead with them to accept their package, to accept their idea, to accept their creativity. That used to be the way it was done. But now with the internet, we've entered this magical space where creators, innovators, thought leaders get to put their content out there and allow the Canadian people themselves to determine whether they like it or not, whether they want to watch it or not. We've removed the gatekeepers. It's incredible. And instead of celebrating just how amazing that is, this government is hell-bent on putting legislation in place to make sure that we maintain these old, antiquated ways.
Shame.
Why? Why? Isn't the very nature of the arts something that should propel us into the future? Something that should have forward momentum? Something that should be creative and innovative in nature? Isn't that the whole point of the arts? So why would we hem these individuals in? For the minister to say that this bill somehow modernizes the Broadcasting Act is incredibly disingenuous, as I have laid out. The minister is failing to account for the tremendous progress that has been made, the creativity that has been allowed to flow. Take, for example, Justin Bieber. He went big in approximately 2013. And the way he went big was because he put out a few songs on YouTube, and he got discovered. He didn't have to put together a big media package, though he could. He didn't have to depend on gatekeepers to either accept him or reject him, but rather he could put his talent out there. And his talent was discovered, and we know that he went big, and he's a Canadian artist that we're proud of. There are many more like him who are aspiring. And by putting a bill like this in place, by putting Bill C-11 in place, what we're saying to that next generation is don't bother. Don't bother. We want to subject that next generation to the same rules that we subjected artists to in the 1970s. Forget progress. If you want to engage in progress, perhaps consider moving to the United States of America or South Korea or the UK. But in Canada, Bill C-11 puts this massive banner that says we are opposed to innovation, we are opposed to progress, we are opposed to celebrating artists.
Shocking.
Bill C-11 ultimately will do two things. It will censor what we can see online because the government will dictate the content that is there. And secondly, Bill C-11 will determine the extent to which creators are allowed to thrive. In other words, the government will go through and pick winners and losers. Some content creators will be deemed Canadian enough, and other content creators just won't make the cut. If they make the cut, they'll be promoted. If they don't make the cut, they won't be promoted. There is nothing progressive about censorship. Nothing. There is nothing progressive about censorship. And that is exactly what this bill is about. It is about censoring Canadians and what they can see, what they can hear, and what they can post online. And it's about censoring artists and whether or not they have access to an audience and to what extent that access is granted. When speaking about this bill, Margaret Atwood, who is an extremely well-known Canadian author, didn't mince her words. She was pretty direct about it. She called it, quote, creeping totalitarianism. Pretty damning.
Why?
Not my words. Margaret Atwood. Creeping totalitarianism. Now, I think in order to understand this a little bit more, we actually have to go back to the origin. We have to go back to the origin of this bill. We have to talk about the motive, because I think that's very important for Canadians to understand. Now, this bill we know started out as Bill C-10 in 2020, and it's gone through a number of iterations since then, but the worst parts of this bill remain intact. Right. In fact, one could argue that it's actually worse than ever, in part because it's had opportunity to change. The government had opportunity to hear from witnesses. The government had opportunity to hear from experts, and the government made a decision to ignore those voices. The government has had opportunity to respond to the Senate amendments, which were very thoughtful, very reasonable, and the government is making the decision to disregard most of those amendments. So one could argue then that the government is actually wanting this bill to be as egregious as possible. So what brought us here anyways? Why is the government so hell-bent on Bill C-11 going through the way that it is? Well, the evidence would say it's because of broadcasters. Broadcasters wanting to maintain power and wanting to hold money. So you have these large broadcasters, CBC, Bell, Corus Entertainment, etc., and they are limited by CanCon rules. A certain percentage of their content that they show on their traditional streaming platforms has to be Canadian content. Now, of course, this acts as a limitation to them. Those are their words. That's what they've said. They don't view that as an opportunity to show more Canadian content. They testified in committee that they view it as a limitation. And so because they're limited, they have to show a certain percentage of Canadian content, CanCon. They say then these other streaming companies should have to do the same because they want it to be same. Further to that, these broadcasters have to pay a certain percentage into an art fund. This art fund can then be drawn from by Canadian artists who are producing CanCon and used for that material production. Now, because these traditional broadcasters have to pay into this fund and these larger streamers don't, the broadcasters went knocking on the Liberals' door and said, hey, we want legislation to be brought in place to quote-unquote level the playing field. We want you to go after these streaming platforms, and we want you to make sure that they're showing a certain percentage of Canadian content, and we want you to make sure that you're taking a certain percentage of their revenue and putting it into this art fund. Now, at first glance, that might seem reasonable, except that when you dig into it further, you realize that the broadcasters and the big art unions are simply gatekeeping. They're not wanting to celebrate progress. They're not wanting to look forward to the future. They're not wanting new artists to succeed. They are simply wanting to gatekeep. They're wanting control or power, and they're wanting money. I want to talk about the foundation on which this bill is built, because it's a false foundation, and it has to do with those who came knocking on the Liberals' door for this legislation. This bill is based on the deceptive notion that Canadian content creators or artists can't make it on their own merit. That somehow they need this special fund in order to make a go of it. But YouTubers and TikTokers, online creators, are proving this notion wrong each and every day. They are succeeding without drawing from the Art Fund. They are succeeding without the government mandating that Canadian content must be watched. They are succeeding because they have incredible talent to watch, incredible talent to offer, and Canadians are finding themselves drawn to it. Now, there's this idea, though, that in order to succeed as an artist in Canada, you need monetary support, and that it's the government that should provide this monetary support. Furthermore, there's this other misinformation that's being spread by the government, and that is that people won't choose Canadian content unless it's forced in front of their eyeballs. That a certain percentage of what is offered on television or the radio or now the internet must be Canadian, otherwise people won't watch it. Well, how degrading is that? Like, as if our artists don't have the ability to produce content that people might want to consume all on their own? No. Instead, the government must rush in and rescue these poor Canadian artists because without government intervention, they won't succeed. What a lie! What a crux! No! Canadian artists are incredibly talented individuals who can make a go of it all on their own.
We have a point of order from the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, we've listened to 18 minutes of disinformation and conspiracy theory. Then the member says that the bill is a lie. I think she has to withdraw that comment given the disinformation we've had to sit through when we sat through it respectfully.
I made my own statement.
I mean, we don't want the use of that word, as much as we possibly can. But I'm also going to make a suggestion that the people that are having side comments, side discussions while the member is trying to present as well is probably not as respectful as either. So I would suggest that we all sit and listen and get ready for the questions and answer component of the debate. The honourable member for Lethbridge.
With regard to money, the Heritage Minister claimed that this bill would capture $1 billion from large streaming platforms. Now, to this day, he's not able to provide how this $1 billion figure was arrived at. So we'd actually still love that document, by the way, if at all possible. But according to the government, they say that they're just forcing the large streaming platforms to pay their fair share. That's how this $1 billion is going to be brought in. And again, at first blush, perhaps that seems reasonable. Perhaps these foreign streaming platforms should just pay their fair share. The government says that this money will save Canadian culture. As if it's dying. I'd be curious to know who says it's dying. I'd be curious to say who says it needs to be rescued. Who says it's fragile? Who says it's on the verge of being extinct? And aside from all of that, and most importantly, isn't Canadian culture what the Canadian people determine it to be? And last I knew, the Canadian population is actually growing. So I think Canadian culture is probably alive and well, don't you? Anyway, it doesn't matter, because neither the minister nor his department have been able to show me that document that shows that this $1 billion would somehow be extracted from these foreign platforms and then infused into the Canadian art scene.
Show me the money.
The reality is, though, it doesn't matter. It's insignificant. And the reason why it's insignificant is because as much as Bill C-11 might produce this $1 billion, the way that things are right now is much better. Much better. Investment in Canadian production isn't drying up, as this government would like Canadians to believe. That's a false notion. In fact, investment in Canadian production is better than it's ever been before, without government intervention. Huge investments are being made. And let me go over that here for just a moment. According to Wendy Noss of the Motion Picture Association in Canada, she testified at the Senate committee, stating that they spent more than $5 billion with a B. That's 5 times more than what the government is hoping to bring in through this legislation. So they've spent $5 billion, one company, by the way, $5 billion, one company, $5 billion. I'll say that one more time, just for the honorable member so he gets that. The government is claiming that they'll bring in $1 billion. Already there's private investment being made to the tune of $5 billion. Wow. With a B. You got it. You got it. That's in 2021 alone. $5 billion. So this government would rather have its way, shut down private investment, suppress that, in order to bring in a government-dictated $1 billion.
Shame. Shameful.
How regressive can you be?
Yes.
How punitive can you be? Like, the government claims to support artists, and yet they're going to do this. They're actually going to shut down the industry. They're actually going to punish the industry that is pumping $5 billion into the creation of content here in Canada in 1 year alone. One company. That is not progress. That is incredibly regressive. Let me be clear. This $5 billion actually accounted for more than half of all of the production in this country. More than half. And 90% of the growth in this sector over the last decade. Hold that up against the government-dictated art fund, and the government-dictated art fund fails in comparison. So do we want more government legislation, or do we actually just want freedom to reign?
Freedom.
I think we want freedom to reign.
Freedom.
We're talking about a production company that hired, trained, and provided opportunities for more than 200,000 of Canada's most talented creative workers. More than 200,000. That is far more than the Art Fund has ever propped up. And we're talking about more than 47,000 businesses that were supported in 2021 alone. Again, far more than the government-run art fund has ever supported in 1 year. So again, you can have government-dictated funds, or you can have private flowing funds. One is far more successful than the other. So, we have to ask the question, is the problem that investments aren't being made in Canada, in its production industry, or that our culture is somehow at risk of disappearing, or is there something else? I would argue that the sector is alive and well, as I've proven. And I would argue that Canadians are alive and well, and therefore so is our culture. So there must be something else. There must be something else. And I've alluded to it, but let's explore it further, shall we? Gatekeepers. We have a government that loves to support the big gatekeepers.
Yep.
The big unions, the big bosses that like to keep power and control, the money in their hands. We have a government that is more interested in those individuals, which compose several thousand people, than they are concerned about the vast majority of Canadians who are consumers who enjoy the content online and the freedom to explore what they will, or the creators, the tens of thousands of creators who are putting content out there and reaching global audiences. This government says, forget them. We want to serve the several thousand union bosses. We want to uphold the power and control and money that the broadcasters want. That's our focus. Shameful. This bill is based on the false notion that artists can't thrive without the government. But in fact, we know they can. We know they do. We know that they will. Part of the problem is that the government insists on using an antiquated definition of what Canadian content is. It's this whole host of criteria that make no sense at all. You can have a film like Canadian Bacon that doesn't make the cut. You can have a more recent production, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. It's written by a famous Canadian author, it's being filmed on Canadian soil, it stars Canadian actors, it employs Canadian producers, but it fails to make the cut. So as much as the member opposite might want to point to Schitt's Creek, well, the title tells my audience what I think of that. So perhaps, there's an opportunity then, of course, so perhaps there's an opportunity then to consider a different way. Perhaps instead of applying these shackles of a certain percentage of CanCon and a certain percentage of revenue needing to go towards this art fund, perhaps we can actually just release all from those shackles. Perhaps instead the level playing field actually needs to be set higher rather than lower. Perhaps it's actually about allowing broadcasters and the internet to exist freely. Perhaps it's actually just about creative merit. Perhaps it's just about tailoring your content to an audience that wants to watch what you produce. Perhaps it's actually just about letting private production companies make tremendous investment into our nation and our artists and helping them to thrive. Perhaps it's about being progressive. Perhaps it's about being futuristic in our thinking, as the former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien actually had in mind when he said no, he would not regulate the internet. Now, everything I've talked about up to this point is extremely important, but there is one point that I have not yet touched on, and it is even more so. And that is the fact that this bill captures user-generated content. Now, this government had plenty of opportunities to make sure that that was not the case, and they did not take those opportunities. When I talk about user-generated content, I am talking about your Uncle Joe's videos on Facebook. I'm talking about those videos on YouTube of kids doing stupid stuff. I'm talking about...
Order. I'm hearing a lot of chatter in the back corner, and I'd be more than happy to put them on the question list when questions and comments do come. But let's respect the honourable member who's speaking. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
He said that they were going to go after my Uncle Joe's videos. He doesn't do crazy conspiracy videos. He's not a conservative. He's okay.
Order. I just want to make sure we just have respect for one another in the chamber when members have the floor and are speaking. And again, chatter does get a little high in this. Chatter does get a little high in this chamber sometimes. So I'll just remind folks that lower voices do carry more in this chamber. The honourable member for Lethbridge.
Everything I've talked about up to this point is significant. But the one point that I have not talked about is user-generated content. And make no mistake, this government had every opportunity to make sure that user-generated content or ordinary content was not scoped within this legislation. And yet this government refused every opportunity that it was given.
Shame.
Now, when I say ordinary content or user-generated content, I'm talking about those videos that are put on Facebook. I'm talking about Uncle Joe's video. I'm talking about Aunt Kathy's video. I'm talking about your mom's video. I'm talking about your video. I'm talking about the amateur YouTube channel that is set up in order to put out some crazy ideas, or maybe do some stunts, and perhaps capture an audience, because that's what some Canadians wish to do. Because they think it's fun. Because it brings them joy. Because perhaps they're hoping to make a go of it and make it big. I'm talking about those individuals who are taking advantage of this free space called the internet, who are putting something out there and saying to Canadians, you can like it or not like it, but I present it to you. And if Canadians love it, these individuals go big. And if Canadians don't love it, or if the global audience doesn't love it, then usually it doesn't go too big. But regardless, those individuals have the right to put it out there. Bill C-11 will revoke that right. Bill C-11 will revoke that ability. It will move their content down in the system and make it undiscoverable. which means that this government will be determining who wins and who loses. This government will be determining which content gets seen and which content doesn't. And it doesn't matter if it's from a large streaming platform or from simply an individual using Facebook. That's crazy.
It is.
And we heard from witnesses at our committee in the House of Commons and in the Senate committee who raised this issue, whether it was content creators themselves who are incredibly concerned, or Canadians who are incredibly concerned, legal experts who are incredibly concerned, consumer groups who are incredibly concerned. There is massive concern around this scoping in of user-generated or ordinary content. In fact, there were some legal experts who went so far as to say that it actually likens us to places like North Korea or China, where the government is monitoring, surveying, and actually controlling what can be posted online. Now, that should be very concerning for everyone in this House. That's not Canada. That doesn't ascribe to the values that we call Canadian. I mean, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms for a reason, because we, at least in theory, value freedom. We value choice. We value opportunity. But when the government determines that it's actually going to regulate what can be posted, what can be seen, what can be heard online, then we're no longer functioning within that realm of freedom. And at that point, then, we are not only taking away from consumer choice, but we are also stagnating the success of these many digital-first creators and individuals who would wish to make a go of it and capture an audience online. And not only for this generation present, but I'm actually talking about next generations to come. Those individuals who are to come after us, who would wish to seek success online, the government will have already determined their future. I'm talking about homegrown comedian Darcy Michael, a self-proclaimed pot-smoking gay man. He was turned away by traditional broadcasters, he told us at committee, but now he's enjoying tremendous success on YouTube. I'm talking about a woman, a South Asian woman from Toronto who goes by Auntie Skates. She's in her 40s and she decided to take up skateboarding during the pandemic, and she thought it would be kind of cool to bring people into her journey with her. So she thought she would start posting videos and including some funny quips. People loved it. They still love it. She's done extremely well for herself. She was able to quit her job in finance, and now she's able to just make a go of it on YouTube. She's able to invest in her family and in their quality of life, and she's enjoying it tremendously. You see, the freedom of the internet and the opportunity to advance oneself within this space without needing to worry about gatekeepers has been quite magical for many. Moms have been able to stay home and enjoy a better life-work balance. Youth have been able to, use their creative imaginations and their skill behind a smartphone, and they've been able to capture an audience, and many of them have gone viral. It's amazing. So it's unfortunate that we have a government that doesn't take the opportunity to celebrate these individuals. It's unfortunate that we don't have a government that takes this opportunity to celebrate innovation and forward thinking, the momentum that is being gained within this space. And instead, we have a government that is insisting on regulating the internet and bringing it back into the ages of radio and television. I mean, I'd be curious to know who in this place pays for a cable package. Probably very few of us. Why? Because we don't want what we see to be controlled for us. Instead, we like on-demand streaming because at the end of the day, we want to watch what we want to watch when we want to watch it. So for this government to bring the internet under this umbrella of the Broadcasting Act, which is incredibly outdated, is wrong. At the end of the day, Bill C-11 will do two things. It will censor what Canadians can say so that homegrown talent and creative content here in Canada will no longer succeed based on merit. Instead, content will be subject to a set of criteria that bureaucrats in Ottawa, and it can be directed by Cabinet, will use to determine its level of Canadianness. And this will favor traditional art forms, of course, over the new creative content that is coming out. As a result, we heard at committee that many cultural groups, including BIPOC Canadians and Indigenous Canadians, will actually be hurt. Furthermore, Bill C-11 will censor what Canadians are able to see, or in other words, what consumers are able to access online. This piece of legislation will effectively make the government a regulator of the internet. The search bar will be conditioned to follow a set of algorithms that are predetermined by this government. And so Canadians, when they go searching, will not find the things that they freely wish to find, but rather the things that the government wishes to show them. So on behalf of Canada's amazing creators, who have achieved tremendous success on new media platforms, or who seek to do so now or in the future, and on behalf of Canadians who value the freedom to choose what they watch and listen to online, I move the following motion. The following amendment, I should say. That the motion be amended by deleting all of the words after the first word, that, and substituting the following. The order for the consideration of the amendments made by the Senate to Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts, be discharged and the bill be withdrawn. Thank you.